The dust-caked stagecoach rattled to a stop outside Breckenridge, Texas, in the blistering summer of 1872, carrying Winifred Wilson's hopes and dreams along with her modest trunk of belongings. Her heart pounded against her corset as she peered through the grimy window at the rugged frontier town that would be her new home. After months of exchanging letters with Jonathan Adams, the man who would become her husband, she had left behind everything familiar in Philadelphia for the promise of a new life in the West, Breckenridge. The driver called out, his voice weathered from years of shouting over the pounding of hooves and the creaking of wagon wheels. Winifred adjusted her bonnet, smoothed down her traveling dress, and stepped carefully from the stagecoach. The Texas heat immediately enveloped her like a wool blanket, causing perspiration to bead along her hairline. The main street of Breckenridge stretched before her, a dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings, hitching posts, and the occasional scraggly tree struggling for survival. "Miss Wilson," a man approached, swaying slightly with each step. She squinted in the bright sunlight. "Mr. Adams." Her voice betrayed her uncertainty. The man before her bore only a passing resemblance to the photograph he had sent her. In the picture, Jonathan Adams had appeared strong and dignified with clear eyes and a confident smile. This man's face was bloated, his eyes bloodshot, and the smell of whiskey emanated from him even at a distance. "The one and only," he said with a lopsided grin, attempting a bow that nearly sent him toppling forward. "Welcome to your new life, darling." Winifred's stomach twisted into a knot as he stumbled toward her and roughly took her hand. His palm was clammy, his grip uncertain. "I've got the wagon just over yonder," Jonathan said, gesturing vaguely toward a dilapidated buckboard with a sway-backed horse that looked as tired and worn as its owner. As he grabbed her trunk from the stagecoach driver, he lost his grip, and it crashed to the ground. Several onlookers turned to stare, and Winifred felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "'S all right," Jonathan slurred, attempting to hoist the trunk again. "Just a little celebration before your arrival. Wanted to steady my nerves." The 12-mile journey to Jonathan's homestead was excruciating. He alternated between awkward attempts at conversation and long periods of silence, broken only by the occasional swig from a flask he kept tucked inside his jacket. Winifred sat rigid beside him, clutching the edge of the seat as the wagon jolted over the uneven terrain. The letters they had exchanged over 6 months had painted Jonathan Adams as a successful rancher with a promising future. He had described his property in glowing terms: a modest but growing cattle operation, a comfortable home, and plans for expansion. Winifred had believed those letters, had clung to them during the long journey west. Now, as reality crashed around her, she fought back tears. When they finally arrived at the Adams homestead just before dusk, Winifred's last shreds of hope disintegrated. The comfortable home was little more than a ramshackle cabin with a sagging roof. The barn leaned precariously, and the few cattle in sight looked malnourished. Empty whiskey bottles were scattered across the porch, glinting in the fading sunlight. "Home, sweet home," Jonathan announced, nearly falling from the wagon as he climbed down. That first night set the pattern for the days to follow. Jonathan passed out shortly after showing her the sparse interior of the cabin, leaving Winifred to unpack her belongings alone. She found the pantry nearly empty, the bedding unwashed, and every surface coated with a layer of dust. Lying awake on a thin mattress that smelled of sweat and spirits, Winifred stared at the ceiling and wondered how she had misjudged so terribly. The letters, she realized, must have been written during brief periods of sobriety or, perhaps more likely, dictated to someone else entirely. Her savings had been spent on the journey west, and pride prevented her from writing home to beg for rescue. She was trapped. Over the next 2 weeks, Winifred tried desperately to create some semblance of order in the chaos that was Jonathan's life. She scrubbed the cabin until her hands were raw, planted a small vegetable garden with seeds she found in a forgotten drawer, and attempted to account for their meager finances. Jonathan alternated between drunken belligerence and remorseful sobriety, making promises in the morning that he inevitably broke by nightfall. The only bright spot in her day was the occasional visit from the neighboring rancher, William Jensen. His property bordered Jonathan's to the south, and he would ride by every few days, ostensibly to check on livestock or discuss water rights, but Winifred suspected he was checking on her as well. William was everything Jonathan was not: steady, reliable, and clear-eyed. His broad shoulders and tanned face spoke of honest work under the Texas sun, and when he spoke, his words were thoughtful and direct. He never mentioned Jonathan's drinking, but the concern in his eyes told Winifred he understood her situation all too well. 3 weeks after her arrival, matters came to a head. Jonathan had ridden into town early in the morning, promising to return with supplies. When midnight came and went with no sign of him, Winifred finally fell into an uneasy sleep, only to be jolted awake by the sound of breaking glass and incoherent shouting. "Woman, where's my supper?" Jonathan bellowed, stumbling through the front door. He had clearly spent the day at the saloon rather than purchasing the supplies they desperately needed. "It's well past midnight, Jonathan," Winifred said, wrapping a shawl around her nightdress. "I waited as long as I could." "Waited," he sneered, advancing on her with unsteady steps. "What kind of wife waits? A good wife would have food ready no matter the hour." "I'm not your wife yet," she reminded him softly. "And we had no food in the house because you were supposed to bring supplies." His face darkened. "Already nagging me, are you, just like her?" "Like who?" Winifred asked, taking a step back. "My mother," he spat. "Always disappointed, always expecting more than a man can give." Jonathan's hand came up suddenly and Winifred flinched, but the blow never landed. Instead, he stumbled, catching himself against the wall. Tears streamed down his flushed face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Winnie. I'll be better tomorrow, I swear it." But Winifred had heard those promises before. As Jonathan collapsed onto the bed and began to snore, she made her decision. She could not marry this man. She would not condemn herself to a life of fear and broken promises. The next morning, while Jonathan still slept off his excesses, Winifred packed her remaining belongings. She would walk to town if necessary, find work as a laundress or a cook, save money for a ticket back east. Anything would be better than this. She had just stepped onto the porch, carpetbag in hand, when she heard the approach of hoofbeats. William Jensen rode into the yard, his expression shifting from friendly greeting to concern when he saw her bag. "Miss Wilson," he called, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Is everything all right?" The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. "No, Mr. Jensen, it is not," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I cannot stay here any longer." William's gaze moved to the closed door behind her, then back to her face. "Did he hurt you?" "No," she said quickly. "Not physically, but he will eventually. He's not the man he pretended to be in his letters." William nodded slowly. "I feared as much. Jonathan wasn't always like this. The war changed him and the bottle took what was left." "I'm sorry for his suffering," Winifred said sincerely, "but I cannot sacrifice my life trying to save a man who doesn't want to be saved." "Where will you go?" She gestured vaguely toward town. "I don't know yet. I'll find work somehow." William removed his hat, turning it in his hands as he seemed to consider something. "Miss Wilson, I have a proposition for you. My ranch is sizable enough that I employ a housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy. She's getting on in years and has been asking for help. The work would be honest, the accommodations modest but clean, and you'd be treated with respect. Hope flickered within her. You're offering me employment, I am, he confirmed. It would give you time to consider your options without rushing into another difficult situation. What about Jonathan? She asked, glancing back at the cabin. William's expression hardened slightly. Jonathan has made his choices. You're not bound to him by law or by church. You owe him nothing. The sound of breaking glass from inside the cabin made her decision easy. I accept your offer, Mr. Jensen. Thank you. William, he corrected with a gentle smile. If we're to be sharing the same roof, even in different wings, I think we can dispense with formalities. Winifred, she offered in return, though most call me Winnie. He nodded, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they rode away from Jonathan Adams's failing ranch, Winifred felt both sorrow for what might have been and relief for what would not be. She had come west seeking a husband, but had found instead a chance at genuine independence, and perhaps, though she hardly dared admit it even to herself, the beginning of something far more meaningful than the paper promise that had brought her to Texas. William Jensen's ranch, the Double J, was everything Jonathan Adams had claimed his own property to be. The main house stood solid and well-maintained, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings, including a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a cookhouse, and a sturdy barn, created a small but efficient compound. Unlike the barren landscape of the Adams homestead, here there were signs of careful stewardship, windbreaks of planted trees, a kitchen garden, and healthy livestock grazing in the distance. Mrs. Abernathy, a silver-haired woman with a no-nonsense manner and surprisingly strong hands, welcomed Winifred with brisk efficiency. About time William brought someone to help, she said, looking Winifred up and down. Though I expected someone sturdier. You look like a strong wind might blow you over, girl. I'm stronger than I appear, Winifred assured her. The older woman nodded approvingly. Good. You'll need to be. Running a ranch house isn't for the faint-hearted. Winifred was given a small but pleasant bedroom at the back of the house, with a window overlooking the garden. The room was simply furnished a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a small desk, but it was clean and private, 2 luxuries she had come to appreciate. Life at the Double J quickly fell into a comfortable rhythm. Winifred rose before dawn to help Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for William and the ranch hands. Mornings were spent on household tasks, laundry, mending, cleaning, while afternoons might find her tending the garden, preserving food, or helping with the ranch accounts, a task for which William discovered she had a particular aptitude. You have a head for numbers, he commented one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, ledgers spread between them. The ranch hands had finished their supper and retreated to the bunkhouse, and Mrs. Abernathy had retired early with a touch of rheumatism. My father was a banker, Winifred explained. He insisted I learn bookkeeping, saying a woman should always understand her own financial situation. A wise man, William said. Too many women find themselves at the mercy of husbands or fathers who control the purse strings. Is that why you've never married? She asked, then immediately blushed at her boldness. William didn't seem offended. Partly, he admitted. I wanted to ensure the ranch was profitable before taking on the responsibility of a family, and then... He paused, staring into the distance. Finding the right woman out here isn't easy. Most ladies who come west already have attachments. The unspoken acknowledgement of her own situation hung between them. Winifred had been in William's home for nearly a month, and in that time, Jonathan Adams had made no attempt to contact her. According to gossip brought by the ranch hands, he had been on a tear, drinking heavily and picking fights in town. "I should return to Breckenridge soon," Winifred said softly. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "You've earned your keep 10 times over," William countered. "The house hasn't run this smoothly in years, and the men haven't eaten this well since my mother was alive. Even so, I can't stay indefinitely. People will talk." William's expression grew serious. "Let them talk. You're employed here legitimately with Mrs. Abernathy as chaperone. Your reputation remains intact." But they both knew that frontier communities operated by their own rules. A young, unmarried woman living under the same roof as an eligible bachelor, regardless of the circumstances, would eventually become the subject of speculation. The situation came to a head sooner than either expected. One Sunday morning in late August, as the household prepared for the weekly trip into Breckenridge for church services, the sound of approaching riders drew everyone to the front porch. Jonathan Adams, flanked by the town marshal and 2 other men Winifred didn't recognize, rode into the yard. William stepped in front of Winifred protectively. "Marshal Dawson," he called in greeting, his voice carefully neutral. "What brings you out this way on a Sunday?" "Official business, Jensen," the marshal replied, dismounting. He was a tall man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice. "Got a complaint from Mr. Adams here about a stolen bride." Jonathan remained on horseback, swaying slightly in the saddle. Even at this distance, Winifred could see he was drunk, though making an effort to appear sober. "She's mine by contract," Jonathan slurred. "Paid for her passage west. She belongs at my place." Winifred stepped forward, ignoring William's attempt to keep her behind him. "I belong to no one, Mr. Adams. Our arrangement was predicated on false representations on your part." "Big words from a woman who ran off with the first man to offer her a better deal," Jonathan sneered. "That's enough, Adams," Marshal Dawson warned. He turned to Winifred. "Madam, I need to understand the situation. Did you enter into a mail-order bride agreement with Mr. Adams?" "I did," she acknowledged. "But upon arrival, I discovered that Mr. Adams had misrepresented his circumstances substantially. He is a habitual drunkard whose property is in disrepair and whose behavior is erratic and frightening." "She didn't even give me a chance," Jonathan protested. "A man has a right to celebrate when his bride's coming." "You were drunk when you met my stagecoach," Winifred countered. "And nearly every day after." Marshal Dawson sighed, removing his hat to wipe his brow. "Miss Wilson, I sympathize with your situation, but these bride contracts are typically binding unless there's evidence of danger or extreme misrepresentation." "Marshal," William interjected, "I'd like a word in private if I may." The 2 men stepped aside, speaking in low tones while Jonathan glared at Winifred and the other riders shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. After several minutes, Marshal Dawson returned, his expression thoughtful. "Adams, I'm going to need you to come back to town with me," he said. "We'll sort this out properly tomorrow when you're sober." "Like hell we will," Jonathan exploded, reaching for the revolver at his hip. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. William lunged toward the marshal as Jonathan drew his gun. The 2 other riders moved to restrain Jonathan, but not before he got off a wild shot. The bullet splintered the porch post inches from where Winifred stood. In the ensuing chaos, Jonathan was disarmed and forcibly removed from his horse. "That's assault with a deadly weapon and attempted murder," Marshal Dawson said grimly, securing Jonathan's wrists with handcuffs. "You'll be spending more than a night in my jail, Adams." As the marshal and his deputies led a now subdued Jonathan away, Winifred sagged against the porch railing, her legs suddenly unable to support her. William was instantly at her side. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. She shook her head, unable to speak. "I think church can wait today," Mrs. Abernathy announced practically. "I'll put on some tea." Later, when the household had settled and Winifred had recovered from the shock, William joined her on the porch where she sat watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple. "The marshal will want your statement tomorrow," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "But I don't think you need to worry about Jonathan's claims anymore. Firing a weapon in anger is a serious offense." "What did you tell the marshal when you spoke privately?" she asked. William hesitated. "I told him that Jonathan Adams owes money all over the county, that he's been selling off cattle that aren't rightfully his, and that his reputation for violence when drunk is well established. I also mentioned that I've offered you legitimate employment and safe harbor." "Thank you," she said simply. They sat in companionable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. Finally, William cleared his throat. "Winifred, I want to be direct with you. I've grown to care for you deeply over these past weeks. Your presence has brought life back to this house in ways I didn't realize were missing." Her heart stuttered in her chest. "William, please, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for anything now. You came west expecting one life and found something entirely different. You need time to establish yourself, to be certain of your own mind. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I would consider it the greatest honor if you would consider a future with me." Tears pricked Winifred's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," he suggested with a small smile. "Not as my intended, not yet, but as yourself, as Winifred Wilson, a woman of intelligence and courage who deserves to make her own choices." "I'll stay," she whispered. And for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach in Breckenridge, she felt truly certain of her decision. The next morning, Winifred rode into town with William to give her statement to Marshal Dawson. The lawman listened carefully, taking notes as she recounted her arrival, Jonathan's behavior, and the events leading to her departure. "Miss Wilson, I've known Jonathan Adams since he came back from the war," the marshal said when she had finished. "He was a different man before Shiloh. Saw things no man should see, lost friends in ways that haunt a person. But that doesn't excuse what he's become." "What will happen to him?" she asked. "He'll face charges for the shooting, but more importantly, he needs help. I've telegraphed his brother in Austin. James Adams is coming to take Jonathan back east to a sanitarium that specializes in treating veterans with drinking problems." Relief washed over Winifred. Despite everything, she didn't wish Jonathan ill. "I hope he finds peace," she said sincerely. "As do I," Marshal Dawson agreed. "Now about your situation. Legally, since no marriage took place, you're free from any obligation to Jonathan Adams. However, as an unmarried woman without family in the territory, your position is somewhat precarious." "She has employment and lodging at my ranch," William stated firmly. The marshal nodded. "I'm aware, Jensen, and while your reputation in the county is solid, you must be aware of how this arrangement might appear to others." "I'm concerned only with propriety and Winifred's well-being," William replied. "Mrs. Abernathy serves as chaperone, and Winifred has her own quarters in the family wing of the house." "Nevertheless," the marshal continued, "frontier communities run on gossip as much as water and cattle. It might be prudent to consider a more conventional arrangement eventually." Winifred felt her cheeks warm, but before she could speak, the marshal's deputy burst into the office. "Fire at the Adams place," he announced breathlessly. "Lightning strike hit the barn during the night. Whole homestead's gone." The news of Jonathan Adams's destroyed property spread quickly through Breckenridge. By mid-afternoon, the community had organized a response. Though Jonathan remained in jail, the tradition of neighbor helping neighbor was strong on the frontier. Men from surrounding ranches gathered to assess the damage and salvage what they could. William, as the nearest neighbor, led the effort. Winifred, along with other women from the area, prepared food for the workers and sorted through the few possessions that had been saved from the flames. "Not much to show for a life," Mrs. Abernathy commented as they inventoried the smoke-damaged items. "A few clothes, some tools, those letters you wrote him, and a Bible that looks like it's never been opened." Winifred picked up the packet of her letters, tied with a faded ribbon. The fact that Jonathan had kept them seemed incongruously touching amidst the destruction. The cleanup continued for 2 days. When William finally returned to the Double J, exhausted and soot-stained, he brought surprising news. Jonathan's brother arrived from Austin, he told Winifred as she helped him wash the grime from his hands and face. "He's taking responsibility for everything, paying Jonathan's debts, compensating for the cattle Jonathan sold illegally, and taking him back to Austin tomorrow." "Will Jonathan go willingly?" she asked. William nodded. "The fire seems to have shocked him into sobriety, at least temporarily. He asked to see you before he leaves." "Me? Why?" "I don't know," William admitted, "but James Adams seems like a decent sort." "He'll be present, along with the marshal. You'd be safe." Winifred considered refusing, but something in her resisted closing this chapter so abruptly. "Very well. I'll see him." The following morning, Winifred found herself once again in Marshal Dawson's office. Jonathan Adams sat at a small table, hands free of restraints but moving restlessly over each other. Beside him was a distinguished-looking man who bore a familial resemblance but carried himself with a confidence Jonathan lacked. Marshal Dawson and William completed the small gathering. "Miss Wilson," James Adams said, rising when she entered. "Thank you for coming. I'm Jonathan's brother, James." "Mr. Adams," she acknowledged with a slight nod. Jonathan looked up, his eyes clear for perhaps the first time since she had met him. "Winifred," he said hoarsely. "I wanted to apologize. What I did, how I behaved, it was unforgivable." The directness of his apology surprised her. "You were not the man you represented yourself to be in your letters," she said carefully. "I was once," he replied. "Or at least I believed I could be again. When we began corresponding, I had been sober for 3 months. I thought I could maintain it if I had a reason, if I had someone counting on me." "Addiction doesn't work that way," James interjected gently. "It's an illness that requires proper treatment, not willpower alone." Jonathan nodded miserably. "I know that now. James is taking me to a place in Maryland that specializes in cases like mine, soldiers who came back from the war broken in ways that don't show on the outside." "I wish you success in your recovery," Winifred said, finding she truly meant it. "I've asked James to sell what's left of my property," Jonathan continued. "After my debts are paid, there won't be much, but whatever remains belongs to you, compensation for your passage west and the suffering I caused." "That's not necessary," she began. "Please," he interrupted. "Let me do this one decent thing." She looked to William, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Very well," she agreed. "There's something else," Jonathan said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a folded document and pushed it across the table. "I've signed a formal statement releasing you from any contractual obligation as a mail-order bride. You're free to make your own way or to make a new arrangement if you wish." His gaze flickered briefly to William, and Winifred realized Jonathan understood more than she had given him credit for. Despite his flaws, perhaps there was still a kernel of the decent man he had once been. "Thank you," she said simply. As autumn settled over the Double J, Winifred found herself truly at home for the first time since arriving in Texas. Her position had evolved from emergency accommodation to valued employee to something more difficult to define. She and William maintained a careful propriety in public, but their private conversations grew increasingly intimate not physically, but emotionally. They shared dreams, fears, and hopes over quiet evenings on the porch or during long rides across the ranch's expanding acreage. Mrs. Abernathy watched their developing relationship with knowing eyes but kept her observations to herself, save for the occasional pointed comment about young folks taking their sweet time about obvious matters. In October, word came that Jonathan Adams was making progress at the sanitarium in Maryland. James Adams wrote to inform Winifred that Jonathan's share of the property sale, after debts were settled, amounted to a modest but respectable sum now held in trust for her at the Breckenridge Bank. "You could return east if you wished," William remarked when she shared the news. They were riding along the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the Double J, the afternoon sun glinting off the water. "That money would establish you comfortably in Philadelphia, or even allow you to continue west to California." "Are you trying to be rid of me, William Jensen?" she asked lightly, though her heart constricted at the thought. He reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. "Just the opposite," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "I'm trying to ensure that whatever choice you make is truly yours, not born of necessity or limited options." Winifred guided her mare closer to his stallion. "Do you know why I agreed to become a mail-order bride?" William shook his head. "After my father died, I discovered that despite his banking knowledge, he had left substantial debts. Our home and most of our possessions were sold to satisfy his creditors. I was facing a future as a poor relation, dependent on distant family members who made it clear my presence was a burden." She took a deep breath, continuing, "I chose to come west because I wanted agency in my life. I wanted to make a decision rather than have circumstances dictate my fate. Jonathan's letters offered that chance." "And now?" William asked softly. "Now I understand that true agency comes not from desperate choices, but from choosing from a position of strength." She smiled at him. "I stay at the Double J not because I must, but because I wish to. I stay because this land has become home in a way Philadelphia never was. And I stay because of you, William." The confession hung in the air between them. William dismounted in one fluid motion and came to help her down from her mare. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't step back but instead kept his hands gently on her waist. "Winifred Wilson," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I have fallen deeply in love with you. Not because you keep my books in perfect order or because you've brought comfort to my home, but because of who you are, your courage, your intelligence, your compassion. I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife, not out of necessity or convenience, but because we choose each other, freely and completely." Tears filled her eyes as she placed her hands on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, William Jensen, because I love you too freely and completely." Their first kiss, beside the creek with the Texas sun warming their shoulders, was everything Winifred had ever dreamed of but had never dared to expect: tender, passionate, and brimming with promise. They were married in Breckenridge's small church on a crisp November morning. The entire community turned out for the ceremony, the same people who had once whispered behind their hands now offering sincere congratulations. Mrs. Abernathy beamed like a proud mother, and even Marshall Dawson was seen to wipe away a suspicious moisture from his eye during the exchange of vows. As a wedding gift, William surprised Winifred with a proper piano for the ranch house parlor, knowing how she had missed music since coming west. In return, She presented him with a set of leather-bound ledgers in which she had meticulously reorganized the ranch's accounts, and projected a 5-year expansion plan that would make the Double J one of the most profitable operations in the county. "Most brides give their grooms handkerchiefs or pocket watches," he teased as he leafed through the detailed projections. "Most brides weren't trained by bankers," she countered. "Besides, I thought you married me for my head for numbers." "Among other attributes," he murmured, pulling her into an embrace that left no doubt about his appreciation for the whole of her. Their wedding night was a revelation for Winifred. William's tenderness and patience allowed her to set aside the nervousness that had plagued her throughout the day. Their coming together was both an exploration and a homecoming, each discovering in the other a passion and connection that transcended the physical act itself. Afterward, lying in William's arms as moonlight spilled through the bedroom window, Winifred reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. The terrifying gamble of becoming a mail-order bride, the crushing disappointment upon meeting Jonathan, the unexpected sanctuary offered by a kind neighbor, all had led to this profound contentment she now felt. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" William asked, tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "How life rarely follows the path we expect," she replied. "When I boarded that stagecoach in Philadelphia, I never imagined I would end up here." "Disappointed?" he teased. She raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "Quite the opposite. I came seeking security and found love instead. I came seeking a husband and found a partner. I came seeking a home and found a future." William pulled her down for another kiss. "And what a future it will be, Mrs. Jensen." As winter gave way to spring and spring blossomed into summer, the Double J thrived under their joint stewardship. Winifred's financial acumen complemented William's practical ranching knowledge, creating a partnership that extended far beyond their personal relationship. The ranch expanded, adding acreage, increasing the herd, and even experimenting with new breeding techniques William had read about in agricultural journals. Winifred found unexpected fulfillment in ranch life. She learned to ride expertly, to identify the subtle signs of changing weather, and even to assist with calving when necessary. The piano William had given her became the centerpiece of weekly gatherings where ranch hands and neighbors alike would congregate for music and companionship. In late autumn of 1873, just over a year after they had married, Winifred shared the news that their family would be expanding. William's joy was boundless, and the entire ranch celebrated the coming arrival. "I never thought I could be this happy," William confessed one evening as they sat on their porch, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "When my parents died and left me this place, I thought my life would be defined by work and responsibility alone. And I never imagined that failing to find what I sought would lead me to discover what I truly needed," Winifred replied. In April 1874, Winifred gave birth to a healthy son they named Thomas James Jensen. Mrs. Abernathy, now officially retired but still very much a part of the household, declared him the finest baby ever born in Stevens County. As Winifred nursed her son in the rocking chair William had crafted for her, she often thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. Had Jonathan Adams been the man he pretended to be in his letters, she might have had a very different life, perhaps comfortable and secure, but lacking the profound love and partnership she had found with William. On a warm day in June, as Thomas neared his second month, an unexpected letter arrived at the Double J. The return address was from Maryland, and Winifred recognized Jonathan Adams's handwriting immediately. With Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle and William away checking on a distant portion of the ranch, She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter inside was clear and coherent, the penmanship steady. Jonathan wrote of his continued recovery, his 8 months of sobriety, and the peace he had found through proper treatment, and the support of others who understood the particular demons that haunted veterans. He asked for nothing, expressed no regrets or lingering attachment, but simply wished to let her know that he was well and hoped she had found happiness in Texas. As a postscript, he mentioned that he had met a widow at church who had lost her husband at Antietam. They were corresponding regularly, and while he made no claims about the future, there was a cautious optimism in his words that gave Winifred hope for him. When William returned that evening, she showed him the letter. "Are you glad to hear from him?" he asked, his tone careful. "I'm glad to know he's recovering," she clarified. "Despite everything, I never wished him ill." William nodded, pulling her close. "Your capacity for compassion is one of the many reasons I love you." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby, Winifred reflected on the strange journey of her life. She had traveled west seeking security through marriage to a stranger, only to find true love with a different man entirely. The mail-order bride agreement that had seemed her salvation had nearly become her prison, while the neighbor who had offered temporary sanctuary had become her lifelong companion. "What are you thinking?" William whispered, sensing her wakefulness. "That sometimes our greatest disappointments lead to our greatest joys," she replied, nestling closer to him. "And that I am profoundly grateful for the twist of fate that brought me to you." His arms tightened around her, and in the security of that embrace, Winifred knew she had finally, truly found home. The Double J Ranch continued to prosper over the years, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the county. William and Winifred worked side by side, their partnership a model for other ranching families in the area. Thomas grew into a strong, thoughtful boy with his father's practical nature and his mother's quick intelligence. In 1876, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Abernathy Jensen, named for the elderly housekeeper who had become family in all but blood. Mrs. Abernathy, then in her 70s, wept openly when told of the honor. That same year, they received news that Jonathan Adams had indeed married his widow correspondent and was establishing a small carpentry business in Baltimore, his skills with wood having been rediscovered during his recovery. The couple enclosed a simple wooden cradle as a gift for Elizabeth, exquisitely carved with Texas wildflowers, a peace offering, and perhaps a final closure to a chapter that had changed all their lives. Winifred placed the cradle in the nursery without hesitation. She had long since moved beyond bitterness, understanding that had events unfolded differently had Jonathan been sober, had William not offered sanctuary, she might never have found the profound happiness that now defined her life. As Breckenridge grew from a frontier outpost to a proper town, Winifred became increasingly involved in community affairs. She established the town's first lending library, using books purchased with the trust fund from the sale of Jonathan's property. Later, when Thomas and Elizabeth were both in school, she helped found a small academy that welcomed children from surrounding ranches who previously had limited access to education. William, meanwhile, became a respected voice in regional cattle associations, advocating for sustainable practices and fair pricing. The innovations he introduced at the Double J improved breeding, water conservation, and diversified crops, became a blueprint for other ranchers seeking to build operations that could weather the boom and bust cycles of the cattle industry. In the autumn of 1882, 10 years after Winifred had first stepped off the stagecoach in Breckenridge, The Jensens hosted a harvest celebration that brought together the entire community. The ranch yard was decorated with lanterns. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by neighbors, and a small group of musicians played as children darted between adults and young couples stole moments alone in the shadows. Watching from the porch as William swung Elizabeth in a playful dance while Thomas solemnly practiced his steps with Mrs. Abernathy's granddaughter, Winifred felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Happy tears or sad ones? William asked, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of cider. The happiest, she assured him, accepting the drink. I was just thinking about how different my life might have been if you hadn't ridden into Jonathan's yard that morning. William's arm slipped around her waist. I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are simply meant to be. As the celebration continued into the night, with laughter and music filling the air that had once known only the sound of wind and distant cattle, Winifred knew William was right. The path that had brought her west had been fraught with uncertainty and disappointment, but it had led her precisely where she belonged. The mail-order bride who had discovered her groom was a drunk, had instead found a love story more genuine and fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. The neighboring cowboy who had offered sanctuary had given her not just a home but a future filled with purpose and joy. And in the heart of Texas, where the sky stretched endless above the rolling plains, their love had taken root and flourished, as enduring as the land itself.